Dr. Giridharan, or as we affectionately call G-Tree at the gym where she currently works as a chiropractor, is 26 years old and a first-generation Indian immigrant eldest daughter. She, as I said before, is a chiropractor. She's incredibly skilled, and I get to witness her firsthand not only work her magic on me and really help me and my body, but also work confidently for clients that are often CEOs, men and women, some her age, but some much, much older. She works confidently and professionally with them. And over time, just watching how she carries herself and how she works, I've been just so impressed by her. So I love having guests of all ages on the show, but particularly, guests that are a little bit on the younger side. I think it's so relatable. Many of the women that we work with are either teenagers or young women that are in their early 20s and trying to navigate different transitions with confidence. So I just thought this would be such a treat to bring Gayatri onto the podcast and have her tell her story a little bit from the inside. So welcome, Dr. Gayatri, actually, if I should be formal, because she deserves that in every sense of the word. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, happy to be here.
It's so fun because I see Dr. G-Tree every Tuesday and Thursday on the reg. She has really helped me. Some of you that have followed along with my pregnancies and stuff might have known, I think I've shared on the podcast that I had like a decent diastasis recti, which for those of you who aren't in the pregnancy world is when the pressure of a pregnant belly kind of separates your abs a little bit. And it can cause all sorts of other issues and back pain and stuff. So she's been really helping me with that. And we get to catch up and we talk about our lives and everything. But I'm so excited because I want to jump right into your childhood. I want to take it back to as early as you can remember and just kind of set the scene for us as to what little G was like.
So I'm 26 right now. So I was born in 97. We moved to America when I was like 3. So before preschool, before anything. Hence, I don't have an accent anymore like I used to. But in India, they start teaching school to kids a year or so sooner than they would in America. So I was already speaking fluently in Tamil, which is like my native language, and English before I even came here. And then, so the transition for me to come to America speaking just English was difficult, but not as hard as it could have been had I been much older. So I did preschool, I did kindergarten, which was definitely a bit of a struggle as I entered elementary and middle school. Growing up at that time, there weren't many Indians alongside me. Like right now, my brother, he is in college and we're 7 years apart. But there's a lot more Indians around him versus with me. I was like your token Indian friend. I grew up in Torrance, California, borderline Redondo Beach. That's my home. Very heavily populated with like Asian, Filipino, but not very much Indian. But coming as a Indian girl, definitely a little bit on the hairier side. Definitely didn't grow up the prettiest. I had my little ugly phase too. It obviously shed a lot of character to, me being who I am now, even being made fun of for my name, honestly, as well. But now I've embraced my nickname, I've embraced my name as a whole, and it's honestly brought me a lot closer to my culture and tradition as well. So,
I love that.
so that
I mean, I think people could probably tell right off the bat that you're such a positive person. And I kind of had a little giggle when you're like, oh, I had my ugly phase, because anyone that isn't, watching this or has seen, our Instagram page for her, Dr. Gayatri is beautiful and glowing. And I usually every morning I see her with without makeup, and she's just like so positive. Her energy is so beautiful. So that kind of made me giggle a little bit. But I totally can just picture you having immigrated at such a young age, and feeling kind of you were one of the only Indians in your school at the time. What that must have been like, just perceiving some of the differences. I think that as young people, as kids, we laser focus on those differences, and they're scary to us for a long time until
yeah.
we realize oh, those differences are actually my strengths. What were you like as a young child? What were your interests? Were you shy or outgoing? What did you like to do outside of school and inside of school?
I think anybody that knows me now could probably never see this because my personality now is a lot more outgoing. I'm very comfortable stepping out of my comfort zone. talking to whoever, making friends whenever. But when I was younger, since there was that obvious divide from me and the other kids at school, I was very much shy, dressed very conservatively, very, very different than what I do now. Not that I don't dress conservatively now, but just very controlled, very tamed. I didn't talk to boys. I didn't really have that many girlfriends either because I didn't really feel like I could relate to anyone just because of where I had come from. But as I had gotten older, especially when I entered high school, like the latter half of high school into college, I kind of just took a look at myself and thought, if you don't try to step out of your comfort zone now, this is never going to change for you. You want to explore other options. You want to be able to be involved in ASB, be in dance, do all these other things. But if you're always just going to be huddled up by yourself, that's not going to change. So it was a bit more of a life change for me as well at that time, come around like sophomore year of high school when I started to just open up and just show my true personality more instead of like hiding it and basking in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that kind of brought me out to the kind of person I am now. And especially in high school, when I started involving myself, like I mentioned, in dance, drill team, and ASB, which was really fun. That I've been doing ever since I was a kid, but started doing it competitively when I was in high school. And that's when I started meeting like a lot of the close girlfriends because we had a lot to relate on and how I started upbringing my female friendships as well.
I think that's such a good point because, you got to just dive in somewhere, right? And a lot of the time, if we're having a hard time kind of like finding your tribe, one of the best things you can do is like, okay, find something you love and like get to that community because that's the best place to find those connections and really your support group and your closest friendships is like to find something that, it especially is wonderful when it's like a passion and something that you love because then you're like your truest self when you're in that setting. When your parents immigrated, what led them to move here? What were they doing for work if they were working? What was kind of their leadership of your family when you were really young?
So my parents got married in 96. My mom was 24 and my dad was 29. My dad's a software engineer, and that's kind of what led us to America. My mom, she was an accountant at the time, but at the time, Indian marriages were arranged. So my parents were in arranged marriage. And it was more so set up to where, the man was going to take care of the family. The woman was going to take a bit of a step back and tend for the kids, which is amazing because my mom was there for me my whole childhood and as I'm growing up, even now, right? And I know not everyone can always say that, but it was helpful having her there for me. But as they moved to America, it was obviously a bit hard for them because they're in this whole culture where they don't know what's going on. This is like, what is this? Like we've never been around this. Like this isn't what we know. So that in turn made my upbringing a little hard just because my parents and I didn't always see eye to eye. It was as simple as, the situation where my mom and dad didn't want me to go to the mall by myself with my friends. And this was in like sixth grade. And I was like, all these other kids are doing it. Like, why can't I just go? I'm gonna be okay. So I remember this one time I was with a group of my friends. My mom was like maybe like a few steps back right here, like walking around with us the whole time. And I'm like embarrassed, right? Obviously at that time, but now looking back at it, I know she was just, an overprotective mom, just making sure her kid's okay. And now that I see my brother going through this stuff, he doesn't have to deal with all this stuff because one, he's a boy, like he's not the oldest girl. And two, I had already gone through this stuff. So my mom's like, oh, yeah, you can go to the mall. That's fine. And I'm sitting here like, what did I have to do all this for?
You're like, you're
But
welcome. Eldest daughter stuff, right? Well, I think it's so interesting now being like a parent. I can, I look at people's stories of their parents a little differently now because it's like you think about that situation in immigrating with young children and not feeling like you have your feet under you and trying to learn the culture and, adapt to the changes around you. But then also like normally like kids are looking to their parents to be like, okay, this is how it works. This is what you'll do with like confidence and like this is the way we do things. But having had like their setting change so drastically, they're learning and changing while you are at the same time. And like it's easier for children to sort of like pick up on differences around them and like everyone says like little kids need routine, but they also do quite well adapting to new settings, if they feel safe and, like you did in your family. So it's so interesting to kind of I can just picture the cute little Indian mom sort of being like, all right, well, I want to let you go, but I just have to like check it out and make sure it's all
Oh,
good.
and it took some time, obviously, because she did that a few times. That was just the most distinct
Yeah.
memory that I had. But then it finally got to the point where, like, okay, like she's a junior now, like she can do these things by herself. I didn't even get a license till I was like 19.
Really?
Yeah, in Torrance, like everything was right by me. So there was really no need for me to have a car. But then I hit college and I'm like, I'm gonna need one now.
Yeah. You're like, it is time. I love it.
Time.
So you're obviously, in a science field. You're incredibly knowledgeable with the body and its mechanics. Were you always like inclined towards those subjects when you were really young, or did that kind of emerge later?
So growing up, I always knew my parents had wanted me to be a doctor. You know, when you're in that like Indian American household, it's very much like doctor or lawyer or engineer. Those are kind of like the three geared professions.
Yes, I know.
I never really had a goal to be a certain type of doctor. I had just known that my parents always wanted me to go through med school. But I guess this kind of ties into how I was raised. But in college was kind of when I got to learn more about things I guess I was protected under, like boys or, learning more about different cultures or different people. But as I was doing that, obviously that distracted me a little bit. And I ended up not getting the best grades that I could have. But as I got older and towards the latter half of college, I thought, I really got to crack down. I understand that med school may not be for me because personally, I just didn't know if I wanted to go to school for that much longer after college. So after I had realized that, my dad had mentioned to me, I have a colleague in San Diego who's a chiropractor. And I was like, oh, okay. Like I know my parents have been seeing a chiropractor since I was young. And he was like, "Why don't you just go check it out? Spend the day with him, see how that goes." And I was like, "Okay." So I had shadowed him a few times, but I think the main thing for me that I really liked about him was that he would heal with his hands and wouldn't necessarily use medication. Growing up in my house, my mom was always like, you should never take medication unless you really need it. So that was just kind of the mental stigma that I was under. So seeing that, oh, you can do all this. And if you need medication, you can use it as a last resort. That was something that stuck out to me. And so what I did was like, okay, well, why don't I shadow with him a little bit longer, see how this goes. And if I continue to like it, I'll apply. And then right after graduation, I had applied and here we are. I had started that next year. So I graduated college in 2019 and I started chiro school in 2020.
Okay. I love that you mentioned like that. I feel like, particularly in Indian families, like the idea of your child becoming a doctor it's accompanied with this sense of like prestige and like, oh, my daughter's a doctor. Like it's definitely like a well-regarded, probably the most well-regarded profession that you can like wish for your child. So that felt very familiar to me. When you picked a college to start with, like how was college applications and all of that testing and stuff? Like, was that an easy process for you, or was it like, a struggle to figure out what kind of college you wanted to go to, given that, I mean, you immigrated much earlier, so I'm sure you had a sense of colleges, but what was that process like for you?
So I had known I'd wanted to stay in California. I had applied to a few out of state schools just to see if I would get in, but I knew my mom would not be down for that, like, especially because she wants me to be within a drivable distance. And as much as I'd say at the time I wanted to leave so bad, I knew I couldn't live with like being too far from my parents because I'm just so used to them being there. But I had applied to all the UCs and all pretty much all the Cal states. And that's the great thing about California. We have so many options to choose from when some states might not have as many options, right? So people end up coming here. But I had known realistically where I could get into college. I knew with the grades I had had at the time, it might not have been like UCLA or UC Berkeley status, and that's okay. But I knew that was easier for me to accept over my parents because they had all these other, at the time, Indian families to resort to, kids going to Duke, kids going to, these like very high prestigious schools. And I had known, okay, like I understand that I'm going to get into college. I knew there wasn't going to be a worry that I wouldn't. It was just a matter of where. And initially, I was actually set to go to Cal State Long Beach, and I was really excited. I was going to be a bio major at the time, and but the thing is, I had known I had always wanted to go to a UC just because, the prestigiousness that a UC holds, and I knew it would still make my parents happy and I'd be within a reasonable distance. I was also on the wait list at the time for UCR. And then as time went on, this was literally when summer had already kicked in before school started. And I get a letter from UCR saying, "Oh, you've been kicked off the wait list, like in a good
Yeah.
way, and you're accepting." And I was like, "Oh my God." And we were in India at this time. So everything was just like a big culture shock because I was so set that I thought I was going to go to Cal State Long Beach. And so then I had gotten into UCR and I was so excited because I had known someone from school, from high school, that was going to be my roommate. So it made the transition a little bit more seamless and still a drivable distance from home. So enough to make them proud and still get me to where I wanted to be.
I love it. Were your parents, having moved here as adults, were they familiar kind of with the school application process and all of that? Were they like pretty dialed in terms of like helping to guide you?
Yeah, so we had had some older Indian family
Mm.
friends whose kids might have been just a year older than me, if not maybe two, who had just gone through the process. So if they had any knowledge to that stuff, it was from them, but it was still, like, a lot of firsts with me, like, their first kid taking
Mm.
SATs, their first kid involving in herself in extracurriculars, like, her first kid, getting distracted with life, So, it was a lot of learning for them along the way as well. To an extent, they were knowledgeable with the application process just to know where I stood or where it was possible for me to get into. So, that was the one thing that worked out pretty well.
I love it. So you mentioned that like your parents always hoped for you to be in the medical field somewhere. Was that always something that you felt drawn to or that you wanted? Or were there other kind of like interests academically for you earlier? Like what classes did you do really well in and which ones did you struggle more when you were in like grade school and high school?
I knew I'd always wanted to do or be part of a career in which it helped people just because I always feel like there's always so much to give. Like I'm always willing to be there for someone. I'm loyal. That's just the kind of person I am. But healthcare was something that didn't strike me until I became like a scribe for a hospital in Riverside, where I was like, okay, like I can get down with this. But I noticed that I didn't necessarily want to be in a hospital setting because sometimes I can't handle blood very well. And that's a
Relatable.
pretty big important part for most like medical doctors. But with that being said, some people don't, view chiropractors as doctors. And I totally understand why they view it that way, but it's hard when, sometimes most chiropractors have the stigma, oh, they're just gonna crack you. Whereas versus my experience with you, you get to see like a whole different side of that, right? I think I've maybe adjusted you maybe like a handful of
Yeah,
times because, with what we're working with you, it doesn't really require that. So I think that stigma is always a little negative because they always think, oh, it's like a rack and crack situation. When reality, you only really need to do it when it's necessary, you know? And that kind of ties into why I chose to not be a medical doctor, but choose to be a chiropractor instead. That way I can still give my parents that recognition, oh, that she's a doctor, but I can actually be hands on in a field that I actually feel passionate about.
totally. And something that kind of like makes sense to you naturally. I also like, giggled when you said like you don't like blood. Similarly, I grew
Yeah.
up my parents are both eye doctors, but, when we were growing up, it's not that they, like, told me what I needed to be, but it was like, I knew based on conversations among my parents and my grandma and everything that, like, the doctor field was something that they would be excited about me choosing. So for the longest time, I was like, "I'm gonna be a pediatrician," because I was like, "I love babies, great." And I think it was, like, 7th grade, we had the fetal pig dissection, and they put this baby fetal pig on the tray in front of
Oh,
me, and I had a full-blown panic attack, had to go into the hallway, was crying, and my teacher, my bio teacher was like, "It's okay, like, you don't even really have to do the dissection, you can just write the report or whatever." He's like, "You don't really have to cry this hard." I'm like, "I'm not crying." Well, I am crying because of the baby pig, but I'm also crying because I'm like, my whole, like, plan is falling apart right now. I'm like, "If I can't handle this, I cannot be a doctor for babies." And it was just one of those moments where I was like, "Okay, like, there are the things that you can want to follow to make the people that love you proud, but you also like have to incorporate what is naturally you, and what
Yeah.
makes sense for you and your mind and your body and your reactions and the things you can and cannot handle.
Yeah.
I do like too how you mentioned your mom's impact, that she always was like, medicine, they call it allopathic medicine. Is that like
Holistic.
yeah, like there's like Western medicine is there as a kind of a last resort, but there's all these different things that you can do to kind of stave that off. And that's definitely been my experience working with you, is that like I've learned so much even about like the musculoskeletal system, and like, oh, like if you're having pain here, it's actually a reference pain from this area, and how everything is kind of integrated, and that you can do so much to really prevent the pain before it happens, by keeping things supple and healthy and all the above. Okay, so
Yeah.
you went to UCR, you had your roommate from school, so that was kind of a nice like comfort zone thing. But you also mentioned that getting to college was sort of your time for like exploration a little bit, and really like getting to know the culture without your family kind of staring down your back. Tell us a little bit about like your first week at college. What was it like, and how did you feel?
So at the beginning of college, it was honestly insane because our orientation was overnight. So I got the chance to get to know like the group of people that I was with. And it was cool because we had carried on our relationship, as like first year went on and a little bit in second year. But that's when everybody starts, like meeting their other friends or joining sororities, which I had done as well. But I definitely think joining a sorority was one of my biggest impacts because it led me to like my lifelong friends that I have now. I honestly didn't think that I would gain so much from it. I had joined it just because, I think this would be a good exposure for me. I'd love to get to have more girlfriends. And if it's true and what they say, oh, these are going to be your sisters forever, then of course, like I'd love that. I've never had a sister myself. I just have my brother and he's amazing, but you got to have some sisters
That's
too.
fair.
But I really do owe a lot to that sorority just because literally my best friends to this day that I've had for 8, 9 years, almost a decade of friendship are from there. So I owe a lot to it for sure.
Which sorority did you join?
I am a Delta Gamma.
Okay, I know a lot of DGs, like a lot of DGs. That's so interesting. So, how were your parents when, like, you told them you wanted to rush a sorority? Was it something they were supportive of, or was there some fear around that?
Oh my gosh, absolutely not. My mom was like, she's heard about the stigma of sororities and what it could lead to, if we all know what I'm talking about. But I had told her, at the end of the day, this is something that I would pay for. And she had said, as long as your grades don't take a dip, I'm okay with you staying here. That was her and my dad's main critique in order for me to stay in it.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, well, as long as we can withstand that, then I'm going to be in the sorority. So I just continued to uphold that, and they were totally okay with it.
I had kind of a similar experience. I think that it's like so much of the way that sororities are portrayed in like the media and in movies at the time was very like
Yeah,
wild party scenes, which like there is an element of that at, certain schools, some more than others. But mostly like all schools, like there are sorority parties and things that go on. But like I think that for my parents, a lot of their perception around that world, at least my mom was a little bit more concerned about it than I think my dad was even, but it was informed, I think, by that media influence. But I had a similar response. I was like, I'll pay for it. Like I had just started modeling. I'm like, I want to rush sorority. I'll pay for it out of my modeling money. And like, I
yeah,
promise you, if my grades go down, I'll quit. And that was
yeah,
kind of a nice motivation for me too, to be like, all right, like I want to do this if it serves me, and if it is really like, yeah, did I want to like go to some parties and have fun? For sure. But like I
yeah,
also, in my heart, I'm like, I'm in college because I want to build a life for myself and do
yeah,
things that are generally good for me. So I think that it was kind of a nice promise to myself and to my parents that ended up like working out, the way that
yeah,
you said too.
yeah.
I love it. So did you live in your like, did you guys have houses, like physical houses there?
So we didn't have like Greek
Okay.
row. We didn't have like houses like that. But my senior year, I lived with sisters, which was honestly so fun. I regretted not doing that sooner. We were all like different. Two of us were seniors and two of us were juniors. But it was honestly so much fun. It felt like a party every day just because we like hanging out. We'd watch like TV together. Sometimes we'd watch scary movies and lock all the doors and just make sure like we were safe and, freak out over the smallest things. And then since we all had the same friends, we would always have like our girls over and have girls' night, get ready for parties together, like whatever it might be. So if there's one regret, I definitely regret not doing that sooner, but I'm glad I got to experience it at some point.
Totally. What would you say was like the most, I, I guess like culture shock isn't the word, but like the biggest like, whoa, this is new thing about being in college for you?
As much as I feel like that existed in high school, I feel like it didn't really exist for me till college, but guy and girl friendships that weren't leading into, like a relationship. I had really grown how to like, gain more guy friends or understand how they are or, be able to hold that banter with them, which honestly I wasn't really able to do when I was in high school because it was still like a moment where I was growing out of my shell and I couldn't really leave the house with a guy other than my mom feeling like, "Oh my god, she's with the boy," and I wasn't allowed to date, you know? So, me being in college, I was finally able to, like, explore that and gain more, like, guy friends, like, platonic friendships. So, that was one of the big things for me that I had noticed. I was like, "Oh, wow, like, this is happening a lot more, like, frequently than it did for me when I was growing up." So, I was like, "This is, I'm not used to this, but I can be."
Yeah, and that there can be like, things aren't so black and white when it comes to like relationships, between the
Yeah,
sexes and stuff that it's like, okay, you can have a friendship and it can be just platonic or it could start platonic and be something else later. But it doesn't have to be
exactly.
like, oh, because I'm hanging out with guys, like this is, what it's leading to or, what I need to be worried about or whatever. Just like kind of noticing some of those like subtleties and the gray area of our friendships in college. I think that's so fun.
It always made me nervous, I guess, in a way to make friends with guys just because, like, ever since I was in, like, 4th or 5th grade, my mom always told me one thing, and she was like, "When you get married, you're gonna marry an Indian guy, and it can be any Indian guy, but it's gonna be an Indian guy." And, of course, like, what am I supposed to say when I'm, like, 8 or 9? "Yeah, of course, mom, I'm gonna marry an Indian guy." Like, little did she know I never was attracted to Indian guys my entire life, so that was tough. Not like, that's another area where my mom and I especially didn't see eye to eye, and now, like, my current boyfriend, he's Hispanic, and I love him to bits, but it took so much time for my parents to accept him, and that was such a process for me because again, it opened so many doors for my brother who probably doesn't have to experience this at all versus me. Took, like, a whole 3 years, to even get them to be like, "Okay, like, this is gonna be a guy that you're gonna marry, then that's fine," you know?
Totally. I mean, having had your parents be in an arranged marriage too, and it sounds like a successful arranged marriage, that must have been so new for them because it probably already felt like a step out of their comfort zone to even just say like it can be any Indian guy, or it's like, oh, but we're not going to arrange it for you. But you kind of
Yeah.
growing up here and being like, that's not what anyone around me is doing. Just like so fascinating. Can you tell me a little bit about like their arranged marriage for people that might not be like familiar with arranged marriage and that the fact that it's like still a thing that happens now successfully too, and actually even some data says that oftentimes like arranged marriages can be more successful than
Then
spontaneous love marriages. Can you tell me a little bit about their experience with that and how you perceived it growing up?
so what had happened was, so my parents are 5 years apart. Essentially, it came time for my dad to find a wife. So my grandma and my late grandpa, they looked at him and they're like, "Okay, like it's you have a career, it's all set. You need to find a wife now." And I guess my dad was like, "Okay." And my dad had so much love for his dad, so he would do anything that he had wanted him to do. I unfortunately never got to meet him, but just the admiration he had for him, he still talks about to this day. So I guess they had shown him a bunch of options of women that were in the vicinity and that could be possibilities. And it was like this whole list of women.
Mhm.
And after meeting them all, my grandpa had told him, "Her, like I like her for you." And my dad was like, "Okay, like you said so, like that's great. My mom's beautiful." Like it was working out. Like they were set to get married earlier in 96, but that year my grandpa had fell and hit his head and the whole marriage had been delayed. And my grandma, she's very protective of her boys and She actually, my dad has two brothers, so she's very protective of them and told them like, "Do you really want to still get married to her? Like, are you sure this wanted you sure you still want this to happen?" And my dad's like, Dad wanted this, so I'm doing this. I'm marrying her. So they ended up getting married later that year in November '96. The thing is since they were an arranged marriage, they didn't really go on dates. They didn't do anything. They really just met that one day when my mom's mom and dad hung out with my dad's mom and dad. They interacted, had food, and then they decided to get married. It's interesting because do I think my parents loved each other when they met? No. But did I think they grew to love each other? Yes. And I can obviously see it because like there's not a moment where they don't care for each other. Even if they're pissed at each other. They're still like about one another and my brother and I like obviously see it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I waited so long to tell my parents about a boyfriend at all because I wanted to make sure I got it right and I wanted to make sure it ended up as successful as theirs.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm so curious. I mean, there's a lot, I feel like it's all over like TikTok and Instagram is like eldest daughter, not syndrome, but like being the eldest daughter, right? And what that kind of means and how it affects you day to day. Do you feel like being not only eldest daughter, but eldest like immigrant daughter, like is something that you'll always carry with you?
Yeah, I often see that eldest daughter syndrome or eldest immigrant daughter syndrome is like you taking care of your family a bit more. Yes, but also you're the one to experience all the firsts, right? So you're the one that's evidently going to be the kid that gets into the most arguments, but you're also the kid that in some eyes are more loved because you're the one that's going through it all first. Like you're the one venturing out into the world and seeing things from your perspective and they're still struggling to see it from your eye. And sometimes they still won't. So I think they're always going to hold you a little closer to their heart. Not to say that they love me more than my brother, but there's just aspects in where they're more protective of me, especially because I'm also a girl.
Yeah.
And it's always going to be that way because my dad still treats me like I'm 5. So,
You're like, so there's that. I mean,
yeah.
there's so much to that. Even, I have two kids and it's like, it's not intentional, but it's definitely like with your first child, like the learning curve is really steep for a parent too. So it's like every single thing is like high stakes and you don't really know and you're just dedicating
Yeah.
so much energy that first time around. And it's like, and you learn a lot after the first time around that like you don't even
Yeah.
realize you're just applying naturally once you have another child. But then also for it to have been a girl and then a boy, like so I have an older sister and a younger brother. And like my sister and I were very like my dad is white from Indiana, so already like my mom kind of had that friction of like going to her parents and, sharing with them that she wanted to marry an American guy. And there was a lot of that was a big thing for her to accomplish. So she already kind of had that first step as like an immigrant. But even like my sister and I were raised very much like we didn't talk openly about any of the like how to be with boys or like it was just basically like you're gonna study, you're not gonna party, like you're gonna be involved in everything and
Yeah.
whatever kind of social learning and stuff that we did, we sort of did it kind of on our own because we just didn't have that like open it was just kind of implied like no you're not gonna have a boyfriend like you
Yeah.
live at home and like boyfriends are for like having a boyfriend is like testing
Awesome.
someone to be married to, which is
Yeah.
something I still believe to an extent and will probably be the same way with my own daughters. But I think it's interesting to like explore those sibling dynamics and stuff because they really do. I think they inform the way that we are. So you have a younger brother. If you could
Uh-huh.
identify traits from your parents that like you have versus what your brother has, like are you and your brother, do you have different parents that you are kind of like more connected with, or do you feel like both of you are totally different from your parents?
So my dad and my's relationship, we're not very affectionate with each other, but I just know that he loves me like so much. But with that being said, my dad is the most stubborn, loud, just big person that I know. And I think I relate a lot to him as much as I don't want to admit it sometimes. And he always gets so happy when he notices things that he and I both did. Like, oh, we both reached for X, Y, and Z. And my mom loves to point that out. And my dad gets so excited about it. And I'm like, oh my God, don't point it out. Like, don't encourage this. But my brother is so much like my mom in the way that he doesn't like to admit it sometimes, but he is very sensitive and he is good when it comes to listening, which my mom is. So I think that's why I relate more to my dad, and then my brother relates more to my mom. And he's also a mama's boy, so it's very fitting.
You're like, we love that. So good.
Yeah.
I want to dive back into your career and how you navigated finishing out college and, kind of that thought process in your mind of like, okay, like maybe medical school isn't the direction I'm going to go. How was that emotionally for you, having, thought or had this sort of expectation in your mind that you were going to go that path and then having to kind of reintegrate your next steps? What was that emotionally like for you and what helped?
There was about a month in my senior year where it was a pretty difficult month for me just because I had mentally known that, yeah, this wasn't going to be for me. I think more so than for me, it was more scarier for me to tell my parents that because they're the ones that I was doing this for. They're the ones that I had gotten this far for. As much as we argue and, babble with each other, I do all this for them, like that's like for them to be able to say, "Oh my God, my daughter's a doctor," and be proud about that. That's all I'm here for. And to realize that I was going to tell them that I wasn't going to be one was just really difficult. I didn't say anything to them until like I had thought it through and told them, listen, like the only thing I want to do is just make you guys proud of me. And I recognize that, me not maybe getting into the college that you had wanted me to get into might have not made you feel that way, but I want to do what I can to make you proud. And that's when kind of my dad had mentioned, we still want you to do something you're happy about. We don't want you to have a career where you're just upset, or you're forcing yourself to do something because we want you to do it. And then it kind of lifted a weight off my shoulders because I didn't anticipate him saying that. A very traditional, like Indian dad saying that, that might have taken him a lot to just say that to me. So then that's when he had brought up Cairo as a potential field. And I was like, okay, well, I actually care about this. Like, I actually can like resonate with this and feel like I can excel with this. So that was probably like the biggest shift for me.
I love that story and hearing about your almost surprise from your parents' reaction. I think it takes a lot to like have a moment like that and then to bring it to your parents, kind of plan that conversation. It's a difficult conversation type to have. Like emotions are charged. And I think it's particularly difficult when you can already like anticipate what you think is going to be the response. And I think with parents that are very involved like that, it could be like, I'm sure in your mind you had like, okay, what are their different reactions going to be? And how am I going to react to those reactions? Like the more crucial the conversation, the more we tend to like anticipate like the pushback in the middle of the conversation.
Yes.
But to have that moment where it was like, oh, like I came to my parents, I was vulnerable and honest with them, and the response was just like they want me to be happy and successful and that they're here for me. I mean, what a great impact it probably had on you and like the confidence that you had in your next steps.
Yeah. I was living at home the majority of my Cairo career too. So it was just nice to know that they were just always there. Like in high school, like starting from then, like there were nights where I'd come home late from dance practice and my mom like she'd be like, "Did you finish that one assignment?" And I was like, "Oh my God, no." And then she'd stay with me till like midnight and I'd like be dozing off on the couch. She's like, "You've got this, you're almost done." Like she didn't have to do that. Like ever since then, like they've just always been so supportive of like my educational career and they did whatever it took to support me in that way. So
I think that level of support is so amazing, and not every child gets that. I think it can also inadvertently put some pressure on you. Like where I experienced this, and I think we've talked about it before, where it's like education was always like so prioritized in my family. And thankfully I was able to like rise to that challenge and really prioritize it myself too. But I think that like when you've had so much like support and love from that kind of parent, it can also really feel like, well, if I've been given everything, like I have to be great, Or I
yeah.
have to like, how could I not succeed? Like there's all these people succeeding out there that haven't had half of these like amazing supportive moments with my parents as I have. Have you
Yeah.
experienced any of that kind of pressure as you've like navigated your early career?
Yeah, like, I had noticed it first, like, in high school when we had started seeing all these kids get into, like, Duke or Harvard or any of these other schools, and I'm like, "Oh my god, like, what am I gonna do to get there?" You know? Or even, like, high SAT scores, and I was like, "Oh my god, like, I gotta study really hard and, like, make sure I had better score the second time around because I had taken it twice." And then when I did, I was like, "Okay, good." Like, I finally got the score my parents wanted me to get, and they were so proud of me. So to see that look on their face, I was like, "Okay, we're good, like, everything's fine." But I think me truly prioritizing my education and just doing whatever it took to excel in Chiro school, and especially graduating with honors, was their point where they looked at me and they were like, "You did it. Like, you grew from these 4 years. You prioritized school, you did everything, things were hard, like, it's a doctorate, right?" So, there were points where I was really, really nervous, especially when it came to my boards, where I was like, "Is this worth it? Like, am I like, should I continue?" You know? But again, having them there, like, my mom always telling me, like, "Just continue to pray and just know that you've done the work and it'll all just fall into place," you know? So, having them see me and walk across the stage, and I have this video of it's a live video of them just, like, looking at me when they gave me my flowers, and I was like, "Wow." Like, I've never really seen that look on their face, and that was, like, absolutely priceless. If I could frame that, like, live photo, like, in a moving photo on my living room, I would.
I love these stories that you're sharing about your parents because I think that sometimes, like in our culture, there's such an emphasis on like finding like independence from your family and finding internal motivation, and everything is just all about like what you do and being independent and all this stuff. And I think that as young people, there's sort of this like, okay, how am I going to like break away from my parents and do things, think independently of anybody around me? But I think there is also value and something very relatable to, like, we do certain things to make the people who love us proud, and there's a great source
Yeah.
of meaning that can come from that, I think that especially if those people are genuinely interested in your well-being and your happiness and your success and safety, that having that connection and that motivation for the things that you do, and especially, like, if that motivation can persist even with having to reroute a little bit or trying something a little bit adjacent to what you originally thought. I think it's such an amazing motivator to have that source of like clearly your parents have given you confidence, especially like, having that moment of that look, just ingrained in you. Those are sources of confidence that we can lean on, for a long time for other, areas of our life years from now. Can you tell us a little bit about someone that maybe is in a similar situation, like maybe they've had that same like, "Oh, I wanna go to med school, but it's not working out, like, what am I gonna do?" Can you tell us a little bit about the decision to become a chiropractor and what like, how many years of training, what it looks like to go through that schooling and getting that doctorate?
So, to enter the chiro field, you need a bachelor's degree. And beyond that, there's no additional testing. Like I know some schools like, the MCAT or the LSAT or the GRE. There's no additional testing like that, but they conduct a few interviews with you and make sure you have the proper prerequisites before applying. And I believe a 3.0 GPA is what you need to have had minimum at college. There's only about 15 or about 15 to 17 chiropractic schools in the nation. And there's two in California, one in SoCal, which is the one I went to, and then one in NorCal. But the process is about you can choose to do it for 3 years and 3 months or the full 4 years. One is an accelerated track or the other one's just the full 4 years. But either way, it's the same information, just one's a little bit more sped up. You can choose to do either one. But you go through 4 years of training, and then the last year, you're pretty much just out on the field. You're already getting your exposure to the clinic you want to be in. So when I was interning at Stark, it had opened my eyes up because it was a totally different field from what chiropractic actually is. When you go into a chiro office, you often see like the table, you have like the electrical muscle stimulation machine. Maybe they'll adjust you, do some soft tissue, and let you go. But here it's cool because I get to be the one doing all the work with my patient. And to me, that's so rewarding because one, not only will I build these relationships with my patients because I just love getting to know people, but also me being able to facilitate what I want to do. Because oftentimes you don't get that time one on one with the doctor for more than like 5-10 minutes, you know? With me, however, oftentimes I'm with my patients for 30 to 60 minutes. So it's nice because I get to see all the work that I put in and see it when my patients are like, oh my God, like I'm pain free, or oh my God, look at my results, especially with you when you had mentioned last week. That was like a big, oh my God, like this is amazing. Like, little did we know this was going to be a solution to the process as well, because our goal was something different. But just seeing things like that make me so happy. So, getting to have that kind of exposure to the chiropractic world and utilizing other techniques such as muscle work or mobility work is great. So it's a little different from a typical office, but I think that's what I like it most because how often do you hear that a chiropractor works inside your gym?
Totally. Yeah. So for people that don't know what Stark is, so there's different gyms like this, I'm sure, around the country. They're all a little bit different. My husband and I train at a gym called Stark that's here mostly in Orange County and has expanded up to LA and I think other areas planned soon. But it's like a 360 approach to health, wellness, and fitness. Started with like just it's like a personal training gym, but they also have a naturopathic doctor that like does blood work and they have like IVs and infusions and all that sort of stuff. And then they have people that are trained in like specifically in mobility and chiropractic. They do supplements and it's really like designed to be a place where you can kind of have that one-stop shop, but it's a little bit more like complex than that. It's like a one-stop, 50-stop shop, but really like the idea behind it is really that, like we were mentioning earlier, like getting ahead of any injuries, illnesses, and ailments that, we all run into in some form or another as we age. So yeah, that's how I met Dr. G Tree. And what she was kind of talking about earlier with like the progress that we've made, like I think I mentioned earlier in the episode about like my diastasis recti, and she's been using this cool, I mean, what is it? It's like an electro stimulation
Yeah.
machine thing.
Well, so it's electromagnetic therapy. It's European technology. So there's like only a handful of people that carry this machine in America, which already sets us apart to begin with. But we're able to utilize this machine to better penetrate the muscles that we're working with and in addition to the tendons and ligaments. So instead of just going and getting a massage where the results are almost temporary, this is leading to more permanent changes, right? Getting you closer to your results. So in this case with Asha, we're able to work to get those abdominal muscles and fibers work closely together and basically sew itself back up naturally rather than having to go through a surgical
Yeah.
route.
So right after my second pregnancy, a doctor had identified I had like a small hernia. Sounds scarier than it is, but like at my belly button, and was told like the only way you can fix it, is surgery, but like take care of your core and stuff and try to just like brace it and not be like putting too much pressure in that area. And I, recently had a doctor tell me, I was asking about it and they're like, oh, I'd be hard pressed to find a surgeon that would actually agree to do that surgery on you at this point because it's so small. So that, I shared that with Gayatri and that was so, it was cool. It's like to see that kind of
Well, yeah,
progress and pride, honestly, that I could see that she had in our success, together in working on, that targeted issue. But it's different with everybody. And that must be a thing that, keeps your work exciting too, because it's like every body is really like a work of art. It's completely unique and works differently and will compensate differently. I want to talk about too, because this is, I mean, a lot of young women listen to our podcast. All sorts of people listen to our podcast. But I would think that being a young woman, a young Indian woman, and a chiropractor, that, it takes some cojones because when she's in there, like sometimes it's, using these machines and stuff, but other times it's like you're like getting in there in like the glute and the, uncomfortable mobility exercises and stuff with these like grown adults, men and women. I think for the most part, a lot of the clientele in there are really like lovely, kind people. But have you ever had any situations where you felt like you had to kind of defend your preparation or skill set or anything like that, or just even your age while you were
yeah.
working? And what works for you when you're getting that response?
I definitely noticed that I can maneuver around different personalities, whether it be a male or a female. But the first thing when you look at me is one, I'm a woman in a predominantly male career. But two, I'm young. I'm quite young, and that's okay. At the end of the day, I started this career soon. So when I am at that age where they expect me to be, I would already have been so much more knowledged, right? And the most experience or growth you're going to get as a doctor is on the field rather than just at school. And me, with having just a little bit under my belt already, I've already been able to see so many different cases where I was like, whoa, they tell you not to look for zebras in a field of horses, but all I've seen are zebras because all these cases are so insane, and I didn't anticipate to see this so soon. But when someone sees me, often it's, yeah, when I had mentioned that I'm a woman or that I'm so young, but I like to just let my work speak for itself in the sense that sometimes people are a little bit more resilient to work with me, but it helps having supportive coworkers or people in this gym that are like, you should give G3 a shot. I promise you, like you're not gonna regret it. And all it takes is that one time where I'm like, okay, let me just show you what I got. And sometimes a lot of my patients are male, and they'll look at me like, you're so small, like you're able to handle all
How are
this
you so
attention, and
strong?
and I'm like, yep, just these big guns.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you are very like I think you worked with my husband once. He's like, "Yeah, she kicked my ass." Like, I swearing, but like you're very strong and I think that that's also like physically it takes a lot to do the work that you're doing day in and day out. You're on your feet most of the time. Can you tell us a little bit about like your own wellness, like rituals, routines, things you do to take care of yourself so you can, do your job and still feel good?
Yeah. It helps a lot that I work in a gym. So it's often like, like you need to take time for yourself. You need to not only strengthen the muscles that you're using properly, but just make sure everything else is in tune, because I can't be having back pain as the chiropractor. So I'll be strength training about, right now it's about 2 to 3 times a week, but I'll also make it a point to make sure I'm getting my steps in because that's honestly where it all starts, right? With cardiovascular health and overall health. But I also enjoy taking Pilates classes here and there. I recently started boxing, as I had mentioned to Asha last week. Just cool to be able to experience these other outlets in terms of exercise because it doesn't necessarily always have to be, just lifting weights. It could be HIIT training, it could be Pilates, ballet, like dancing, like whatever it is. And I like exploring those options, especially when I'm getting a little tired of the same routine. But the main thing for me is just to keep my body moving and making sure I'm taking care of myself, or else I'm gonna start having a lot of issues working the way I do.
Totally. I love it. Well, this has been so fun to sit down with you and really like dive into your story growing up and your path to where you are now. You are so inspiring and just delightful. And I think that so many people will relate to your story and your mission and just like how you want your impact to be on the world. So, I mean, obviously, I'll get to talk to you again like tomorrow, but tonight I want to respect your time. So, we usually close our interviews with kind of a fast 5 questions where you can say whatever comes to mind. And then we have a final question that we always wrap up with. So, does that sound good to you?
Sounds
Okay,
good?
perfect. Number one, what is your favorite part of the body to help people with?
My favorite part of the body to help people with are their necks, just because I can relate to holding a lot of tension and having a lot of pain in your neck. And oftentimes you're using your neck a lot more than you realize. So seeing people be able to get the results that they want, especially with their neck, is very rewarding. It's just something that you're using so much. So, especially even more than your low back sometimes when you're bent over on your phone or on your computer. So,
Totally. Number two, what's your favorite Indian meal?
I love paneer, tikka masala with naan and basmati rice. That's my favorite go-to meal, never steers me wrong.
Love it. Comfort food. What part of India is your family from? This is not a question, but
We're from South India, so we're from Chennai.
love it. My mom grew up in New Delhi, but grew up with like very South Indian culture and spoke Tamil growing up. So number three, do you have a like morning ritual or routine that you always start with?
So lately, I have a hatch alarm. So the way that wakes me up is amazing because I used to honestly not have the best sleep, but by not waking up to an alarm, but actually waking up to the room brightening up is amazing. And I start off the day with drinking water, making sure I brush my teeth, obviously. He's a hygiene girly. But honestly, just going through the day with that. And then on my way to work, kind of just listening to the jams, what wakes me up. I usually have pretty early mornings since I work at a gym. So sometimes as early as 6 a.m. So whatever just kind of pumps me up and gets me going.
Love it. Number 4, do you have any heroes or idols, people that you just look up to?
Definitely a little redundant, but definitely my mom and dad. Moving to a country that they know nothing about wasn't easy, and I know I don't say it to their face as often as I should, but they've sacrificed so much for my brother and I to be able to live the life that we lead, and I could never be enough thankful for them. So
Sweet. And number 5, if you're just like having a day, having a hard time, do you have any techniques or things that you do to just like turn yourself around?
So lately, I've been practicing mindful breathing. The first thing is if you catch your tongue at the roof of your mouth, just let it go from there. And then take 5 deep breaths and turn everything on do not disturb, and then get into some journaling. I've noticed that this is a very helpful way for me to release stress, whether it be from a long day or just the day just didn't go as I'd hoped. It's just a good outlet for me that's both healthy and something I'd like to stick to.
Well, for our final question, we always ask, what was one quality that you had as a young woman, young girl that maybe you didn't take pride in then, but you're so proud of now that you can look back on yourself?
As a young woman, something I didn't necessarily pride myself on then would be just my loyalty as a human being. At first, I was like, am I making the right judgment, whether it be with people or with situations? Or is this something that I should stick by because I'm a loyal person? But it's honestly, I'm really happy about just because it just goes to show my character and the kind of person I am.
You definitely, I feel like you're a person that has that inner compass through and through. And it's been just a treat to see where that comes from and how it's been woven through your past. So thank you, Dr. Gayatri. This has been a treat, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.